You can do it, and it doesn't have to be this horrible struggle where anytime you do it, you're starving and you feel terrible. You should feel good, satiated, and lose the weight and be able to maintain it long term.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Resistance Podcast. This is episode 2. We're your hosts, Connor and
Thurston.
Today we're going to be talking about a pretty interesting topic that I think most health-conscious people will be interested in, and that is
Weight loss, more specifically fat loss.
Awesome. So we're going to take a deep dive on fat loss and how we can, implement that into our lives in a healthy lifestyle. But first, I want to get your reaction to this new study that was just put out. Researchers found a deficiency of taurine, a nutrient produced in the body and found in many foods, is a driver of aging in animals, according to a study led by Columbia researchers and involving dozens of aging researchers around the world. Interesting, right?
Yeah.
So this is what they found. The team looked at levels of taurine in the bloodstream of mice, monkeys, and people and found that the taurine abundance decreases substantially with age. In people, taurine levels in 60-year-old individuals were only about 1/3 of those found in 5-year-olds. The researchers started with close to 250 14-month-old female and male mice. Every day, the researchers fed half of them a bolus of taurine or a controlled solution. At the end of the experiment, the team found that taurine increased average lifespan by 12% in female mice and 10% in males. For the mice, that meant 3 to 4 extra months, equivalent to about 7 or 8 human years.
Okay.
That's pretty interesting, right?
It is. Now, the first thing
Let's get the Thurston take just with no prep.
Now, I absolutely know nothing about this, by the way. This is the first time I've heard of it, so I'm not up to date with the research.
I know, it's
obviously.
fun, right?
But the first thing that comes into my mind is because they do all this research on mice that doesn't transfer to humans, especially with longevity and things like calorie restriction. And I've heard Peter Attia talk about that as well. So it doesn't always transfer over. That's my first little, I'm always going to have a little skepticism initially, and then I dive in and go a little further. I mean, taurine obviously is amino acid. I know a little bit about that, but I haven't heard it in relation to that, anything that you said there. But I would be a little hesitant thinking that just taking taurine is going to add 7 or 8 years onto someone's life.
Right.
We'll see. I could be totally wrong, and maybe we'll go back here and go, look how wrong you were. But I don't know. So,
yeah.
But that would just be my initial kind of thing. If it is, great. I'll take it.
We'll hold out hope for that. Yeah, I know, exactly. Everyone's just going to start pumping it.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, we're going to get into weight loss. And so you were kind of talking about this before we started rolling, but there's so much good information out there, and there's so much bad information. And so I just kind of wanted us to take a look at this really quick before we get started and see if this pertains to our conversation today.
Sure.
Here are 4 insane weight loss hacks that I bet you didn't know. Mixing cinnamon and honey in water increases thermogenesis to the point where it burns more calories than you consume, therefore makes you lose weight. Eating small and frequent meals increases your metabolism, helping you to lose more weight. Eat your favorite sugary snack after your workout, as it'll be utilized for energy and it won't be stored as fat. And lastly, don't believe everything you hear online, as it's really easy for influencers to make up facts and for misinformation to spread. So if you want to cut out the nonsense in the health and fitness industry, then you really should be following me.
Dude.
Okay.
I love that he gives out some crazy facts and then says, don't believe everything you hear online.
Yeah.
Oh, it's so rich.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on that? Before we get started, should we be eating our favorite sugary snacks after our workouts?
God, no.
30 seconds to respond.
No, and no. I can keep saying no for 30 seconds. Definitely no. That's not a good idea at all. I mean, when you work out, you want all the circulation to still be in the muscle. You want to keep the growth hormone going and stuff like that. I generally don't like to eat for at least an hour after you work out to get the full benefits of all those things. And definitely you don't want to spike up your insulin.
Dang it.
So, it's...
Yeah, what about well, actually, we'll get into frequent small meals later, so let's hang on that.
Oh, I mean, okay.
Okay,
yeah.
So maybe don't eat candy after your workout. More on this later, guys. Well, Thurston, let's jump into our first big topic, and we'll take a few minutes here. What causes weight gain?
what causes weight gain? Okay, well, there can be a myriad of various different things that can affect weight gain. Everything from sleep quality, or the amount of sleep that you get. Obviously, nutrition plays a massive role. Sedentary lifestyles. So there can be many factors. But if I was to have to kind of zone in and pick one in particular, one in particular is going to be where I would say it's going to be the change in our food. It would be the single biggest part of all that. All the other things do play a role for sure. But if I had to single out one that actually causes the weight gain in the first place, it would be the food that we're eating has changed dramatically over the last 100 years.
So what is it in our food that is making us store it as fat?
Yeah, okay, well, and again, I always use this as a bit of a framework, because I go, okay, well, when is it that we started to gain all this weight? And then if we can go back in time and do what we did before that happened, without going crazy, that's probably a good place to start.
Yeah, so how has like obesity and diabetes and these things, how much has it increased in the last 100 years or so? And how do we look backwards to see what was working, you know?
Yeah. So, I mean, that's an interesting place to start, because that's always the way I look at it. Go, okay, well, 100 years ago, rates of obesity were minuscule and diabetes was minuscule. I mean, even 50 years ago, diabetes was only 1%. Now it's 14%. So that's a 1,400% increase.
Wow.
And these things tend to kind of travel together. So if you look at rates of obesity and diabetes, it's almost parallel as they're going up. Because our main concern is always metabolic health. I know we're going to specifically talk about weight loss here. And of course, it's the aesthetic thing. People want to look a certain way, and that's fine. But I'm way more focused on metabolic health. And it's not so much that, you know, if a person weighs a certain amount, it's just a number on a scale. But it is an indicator that there could be, in most cases, especially if they're in the obesity category, it is an indicator for metabolic health issues. So I always look at it like that. So yeah, if you look at the last 100 years, I mean, obesity, diabetes, all these things was minuscule numbers, like really like single digits. And now we're at the rate, the latest figures that I've seen is 75%, that's 3/4 in America, are overweight, and close to 45% are clinically obese.
Wow.
So huge numbers, huge numbers.
Okay, so what changed? From my perspective, you know, we've just kept evolving, and technology and science has just gotten better and better. We should be healthier. We have, you know, access to gyms and more equipment, more trainers, more, you know, YouTube videos of people explaining how to be fit. Like, there's so much accessibility around fitness and health. What changed? Like, why are we progressively getting more unhealthy?
Yeah. Well, again, going back to where I would focus in, and I want to talk a lot about today, because, again, like I said, all the other factors are definitely components. Even psychology plays a big role in this as well, like emotional eating, etc. But again, if I was to pick out the big one that's going to have the biggest impact, it's going to be the change in our diet. So, and in particular, ultra-processed food.
Okay.
Now, we actually have a video where we break that down into the different components, because what is ultra-processed food? But obviously 100 years ago, we didn't have all these ultra-processed food. Like, you walk into a grocery store today, you've got, I mean, like tens of thousands of different types of foods, but they're all these weird things that obviously didn't exist 100 years ago, or definitely don't exist in nature. So that's the biggest kind of change. Now, so that's where I would go, okay, well, whatever we were eating 100 years ago, and so this is where it kind of debunks a lot of stuff, because you don't even need to go that extreme. Whether it's, you know, you've got all these extreme things that we talk about, but just go back 100 years and whatever our grandparents or great-grandparents were eating, generally they were much healthier and didn't have the same levels of obesity as we do today.
So what has changed and what has stayed the same in the diet? Is it, you know, like, is it the high fructose corn syrup that everyone talks about? Is it that that's changing it, or like what is in these processed foods that like is making us so unhealthy?
Yeah. So I break it down into 3 components. So ultra processed food now makes up close to 70%, almost 3/4 of what people eat on average in this country, which is huge. So again, 100 years ago, 200 years ago, you're talking tiny fractions of a percent, and now we're up to this level. And the main components, when you look at ultra-processed food and you go through the ingredients, roughly 1/3 of that is going to be sugar. That's a massive change. So if you go back 200 years ago, the average consumption of sugar on a daily basis was 5 grams.
Okay.
You go 100 years ago, that jumps up to about 20 grams.
Wow.
Now you have 50% of people are consuming close to 200 grams of sugar a
Isn't
day.
it something crazy, like 100 pounds of sugar per year or something?
It's a colossal amount.
Yeah.
I can't do the math straight away in my head right now,
yeah.
but it's a massive amount. Now, the dose makes the poison. So this is something like, there's 1 or 2 grams of sugar. You don't have to like go freak out just because you see sugar in the ingredients.
Right.
But and again, it's going to differ from person to person, because some people, if they're active and they've got good muscle tissue, etc., they're going to be able to consume more sugar and not cause a big, issue with their blood sugar, insulin. And we can get into this because insulin is known as the fat-storing hormone, so we can talk a little bit about that. So sugar is going to be a big component. Then the other component is going to be industrial seed oils. So all of these ultra-processed oils. And when you look at the process, you can kind of see, maybe that's not so healthy. They go through 14 stages where they heat it, and they have to bleach it, and then they got to deodorize it at the end because it's like rancid and it stinks. And then they ship this off, and then we use it for cooking. So the problem is it's in everything, all ultra-processed food, restaurants, etc., because it's cheap. So that's another huge component to it. And then the third component is going to be the processed grains in particular. That's kind of high glycemic. So those, flours and stuff like that, because it takes away the natural fiber, which slows down the absorption,
Right.
and then you're going to get it acts very similar just to pure sugar. So
Right.
sugar and ultra processed grains, and then you throw in those ultra-processed rancid oils. That's literally a recipe for disaster, what I call donuts. So in other words, you got all those components in there. You got a lot of sugar, industrial seed oils, and the flours processed all in one. So if I wanted to get super unhealthy as fast as I could, that's what I would load up on.
That's a scary thing too, because like I think everyone knows when they go into like a donut shop, they're like, I'm gonna have a treat, and they know it's not good for them. They know it's packed with sugar, and it's like, okay, I'm gonna do that on Friday night. But I think the scary and the alarming thing is how much hidden sugar is in all these processed foods.
Yeah.
People don't realize they're eating it. It's in the bread, it's in the cereal, it's in everything.
Sodas, because again, as part of the masterclass that we did, one of the drinks had like just a little drink, 77 grams of sugar just in one, and I was scooping them out as well.
God.
Like 77 grams just in one little soda. And that's not even like a big gulp thing or anything like that. This is just like a normal bottle
like
size.
A 12-ounce can
like
or
it's
something.
amazing. I mean, they're just literally liquid sugar. And that's what you see. Like when you see people lining up in these coffee shops, the coffee is like a little bit, it's all these syrups and everything else that goes into them. They're literally
They think they're getting
up.
a caffeine buzz, but they're really just getting sugar.
Yeah, and sugar is very addictive, and the great Dr. Robert Lustig did an amazing video, which I recommend everybody to watch on YouTube, called Sugar, the Bitter Truth. So all of those kind of ultra-processed foods, in particular the sugar and the flours, they're going to jump up your blood glucose. And then what happens is you need to then have a lot of insulin. And when insulin is elevated, that's a fat-storing hormone, so that's a big component of it. I'm not saying it's the only component, because we're going to talk about more things, but it's definitely one of the driving factors. And again, when you look at the blood sugar and insulin imbalance, and you see that the weight gain and diabetes is parallel in terms of the increase over the years, it's that the underlying issue then can be very similar. So that's where you can see those parallels.
Yeah, I'm interested also, like, does the sugar and all the processed foods, doesn't it make you just crave more of the same foods, and that's half of the battle in itself?
Yeah. So, yeah, because once you get that blood sugar spike, so it's going up again in natural foods. It's very hard to, match the spikes that you're going to get of these ultra processed foods, because as soon as you kind of take these drinks or whatever, they're absorbed straight away, causes huge spike. Whereas real food, like even like the difference between, for instance, if you eat fruit, if you eat an orange or whatever, there's a good bit of fiber in there.
Yeah.
And then there is a bit of sugar in there, but then
counteract
it's
it.
absorbed slower because of the fiber, and then it's less, obviously. But you eat an orange compared to having a glass of orange juice,
God.
especially the one where there's no pulp in it, then you're drinking liquid sugar. And it's the same as a soda, so massive amounts of sugar. Because you could drink a glass of orange juice that could have 5 oranges, but if you have to sit there and eat through 5 oranges, first of all, it's going to take you longer. You're going to get a lot more fiber, which slows down that spike.
A lot more
so
work,
big
too.
Difference. Exactly, yeah. So you're less likely to have an issue with the real food compared to the processed foods.
Okay, awesome. Well, we're going to get into a lot more of this. We're going to get into how those hormones work, how the metabolism works. I want to ask one question, if you could give us a quick response before we move on, because I feel like weight loss it can be a really tricky topic because it's it's just very real for some people. It also feels very impossible. And I think, the question is weight loss, is obesity genetic? Because if it is or if it's not, I want to give people some hope to listen further so they can understand how to overcome this.
Well, genetics, this is quite
Because some people just feel like they don't even stand a chance. Like, why try?
Yeah. Unfortunately, I don't know where this comes from, because if you talk to somebody, and I'm not an expert in genetics, but if you talk to somebody who's an expert in genetics takes a long time, like multiple, decades, even hundreds of years for genetics to start to change. So to say it's all genetic, and I hear this not just with weight loss, but with diabetes and all these things.
Yeah.
How is it that suddenly, 50 years ago or 100 years ago, we're talking about tiny amounts, and then suddenly now we're up to huge amounts? Genetics doesn't explain that. So that's a really strange way to explain it, because obviously if it's just because your father or your grandfather or mother or whatever had it and then you have it because it's genetics, well then you'd see even rates of obesity and diabetes over the last few thousand years. But you're not seeing that. You're seeing this huge rise. Plus you're seeing things like, say people are healthier in Japan, but those people, if they move here, like as kids or when they're younger, then they end up catching up to the same rates of obesity and diabetes as we have here. So the genetics argument, now I'm not saying there can't be a genetic component for an individual. There absolutely can be, and that can happen. But you're talking about very, very, very small fractions of people that are going to have genetic predispositions. And again, we can go into epigenetics, which is more to do with the lifestyle and your surroundings. And it's more to do with epigenetics than actual genetics. So for the vast majority of people, I would say 95+%, they can absolutely control it through other interventions. And it's not just they're preordained and that's the end of it.
Wow.
So.
Well, that's good. So we talked about super ultra processed foods and how that affects, our body's basically ability to store fat and gain weight. What are the other elements going on besides, the insulin spike, the blood glucose? What else is going on in the body?
Yeah, so that definitely plays a role. And it's funny because there is a big, huge kind of online argument between that and calories, which is another thing. But actually,
we'll get to calories. Don't you worry, internet.
Yeah.
The comment section is going to get rowdy on that part.
Yeah. But really, to be honest, I would think the main overriding factor is we actually have a set point in our brain. So in the hypothalamus, we have a mechanism that tells you when you should be hungry and when you need to eat and when you feel full and satisfied. And if you think about it, for hundreds of thousands of years, that's worked perfectly. So we didn't even know what calories were a few hundred years ago.
Yeah.
So we would just eat until we're full, and then that works, and then that would be great. And there was, everyone was in great shape and super healthy because they were eating healthy foods and that mechanism. So the ultra-processed foods has pretty much hijacked that system and sort of tricked it. And that's the overriding factor, quite frankly, of why people are struggling to stay at a certain weight, and the weight gain and obesity has jumped up. So in that there's like a hormone called ghrelin. So that's the hunger hormone. And I always think ghrelin is like gremlin. It's
I was
like
going to say, it sounds like a little like goblin on your shoulder.
Exactly, and even in our master class, we have a little clip of it where we put a little gremlin on my shoulder and sort of eat more,
It's got
eat
a graphic
more.
of gremlin going across the screen.
Yeah, so we got to get that gremlin under control. So the problem with these ultra processed foods is the way that different flavors and etc. are made up of that food. And a lot of the food scientists do this on purpose, by the way, because then you're going to eat more and then they're going to make more profit. So the foods that we're consuming, these ultra processed food, it kind of tricks your brain into being hungry all the time. And we're mixing different flavors and tastes that, again, wouldn't have happened in nature. So it's what's called sensory specific satiety. So if you eat the one type of food, like it's just savory type food, you'll eat a certain amount and you'll feel full.
Right.
But then dessert comes along.
I was about to say, is this where we get into like the second stomach for dessert?
Exactly, yeah,
Got
yeah.
it.
So then when the dessert comes along, it's like a different flavor and a different taste. So it resets that where you're hungry all over again. Once you kind of even think about it, but smell it, taste it, that then resets your hunger, so then you're hungry all over again. Now, funnily enough, if you're trying to eat as much as possible, like in food eating contests, they do that on purpose. So they could be eating as many hot dogs as they can.
Like shoot some orange juice
but
back
they
or
feel
something?
full. Yeah, they'll have a little bit of lemonade or something on the side to kind of re-trigger their satiety, and then they're
Yeah.
hungry and they can keep
I'm
eating.
not going to lie, I've used this to my advantage before. Me and some of my friends, Ben, our tech guy back here, we liked the restaurant Fogo de Chao, which is all you can eat Brazilian. And, you know, we go there, we want to just get all the protein possible, but we also want to, like, you know, get our money's worth. So you get full, go over to the pineapple, just have a little bit, and you're back in business.
Wow,
Yeah.
interesting. Well, there you go. Yeah, that's great.
I'm not saying you guys should do that, but if you're trying to get your money's worth, it's a pretty good idea. It's a life hack.
Now they're not going to let you back in there, but anyway.
Oh, I know. We're already on the outs with them.
Yeah, but that is the overriding factor, because if you don't take that into account, you will not succeed especially
Yeah.
long term, and it's going to make it way harder, because if you're trying to constantly fight hunger and just force yourself not to eat, oh my gosh, you'll just go insane. There was that Minnesota project, Gary Tabbs talks about it, where the prisoners were put on this ultra low calorie diet, but again, it was not super healthy. So they were hungry, and oh my God, some of them like literally chopped off their fingers. They were like going insane from the hunger. So
Epic.
fighting hunger is not a great thing. And you know, we really don't want people to have to do that. So if you truly understand what is it that makes you feel full and satisfied, and what is it that makes you feel hungry, that is going to completely be the answer for 90% of people. So I would just say, understand that, and then the rest becomes so much easier.
Just controlling your mind, basically.
Well, yeah, but it's not even where it's like not like where you have to think a certain way. It's just understanding, well, if I eat this, I'm going to feel full and satisfied, and then it's going to be easy. But if I
Don't add the sweets at the end. Or
yeah, and those ultra processed foods, like they will just like they literally advertise, once you eat one, you can't stop eating. Like, I mean,
Is
it's
it
crazy.
Is it Ozempic that everyone's taking right now for diabetes?
That's
Is that
one
what
of
it's
them.
called?
Yeah.
Isn't that, if I'm wrong, correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't that just like basically giving more, is it leptin, and making you feel satiated?
So yeah,
Like, isn't it just getting into the satiation stuff? It's not like a magic pill.
Yeah, so I mean, it is interesting, and I'm definitely following it, because I'm not against these things at all. I think for certain people it could work great, but you have to understand the pros and cons of everything. So my very little understanding right now, but I'm going to go into it deeper. But yeah, that it is definitely an appetite suppressant. So you will feel fuller, and that's ultimately why people lose weight on it. And that is obviously not necessarily a bad thing. But the problem is, if you don't understand everything else, that if you just suppress your appetite, now you're consuming less food. And if you don't change the quality of that food, and you're taking in less protein, and then what can happen is your metabolism can slow down over time. Because I did see in the research, now I can't remember the exact percentage, but like 1 year later, large percentage, 70, 80% of people will end up regaining the weight after they stop that. So that's something you have to be careful about. So, you know, if you're using it and you're sensible about it in conjunction with other things, maybe, and I'm not a doctor and I'm not, you know, advocating this, but then maybe it can be useful for certain people if you're, but obviously I always try to do all the natural things first, which we will go through. And I think, again, for 90% of people, will work before they have to revert to anything like that.
Yeah, I guess without us knowing too much, from my perspective, I'm like, well, I guess the issue is that if you're not eating enough, you just run into the issue of, you know, having micronutrient deficiencies.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
While we're here, can we just talk a little bit about the relationship between obesity and type 2 diabetes?
Yeah. So like I was saying before, diabetes and obesity seem to travel together. They're very much associated with each other. Now, of course, you can have obesity without diabetes. You can have diabetes without obesity. But in general, they tend to go together. So because the cause of diabetes is going to be, again, a lot of the time, ultra-processed foods, again, a lot of sugar and things that are going to cause your blood sugar levels to spike. And when the blood sugar spikes and the body needs to produce insulin to take care of that sugar. And then insulin is also a fat-storing hormone. So that's where the link between those two, and that's a very kind of simplistic. Again, I'd recommend going into Dr. Robert Lustig. He explains these things in a lot more detail very, very well. But that's just the basic thing. It's the blood sugar, insulin, and when you can kind of follow that, you see that the obesity and diabetes tend to have a big link together.
Interesting. Awesome. Anything else you want to cover on this topic before we move on?
On the insulin and blood sugar?
Insulin, blood sugar, and also just satiation and stuff.
Yeah. So it's funny because, like I said, I mean, there's sort of almost this big argument between the idea that it's just to do with the brain and the ghrelin and leptin and that. And then, of course, you have it on cellular levels, the blood sugar and insulin. And I tend to think it doesn't have to be one or the other. I think they both contribute. If I had to pick one, definitely the satiation one for just pure weight loss, weight gain is going to be the overriding factor. But for sure, the blood sugar insulin is playing a role there too.
What are some practical things people can do every day when they're eating to keep the ghrelin under control?
Yeah, so...
You mentioned not eating, the sugary sweets at the end of your meal.
Yeah. Well, the obvious thing is, again, if the cause of it is still there, like if, take the knife out and then that's you can try to, fix your leg while there's still a wound or if something is sticking in it. But the first thing you want to do is take the pain away. So in other words, take out the ultra-processed foods and the foods that are causing the imbalance of blood sugar and insulin, and then also causing way more ghrelin to make you hungrier all the time. So reducing the ultra-processed foods is always going to be number one. But then there are some awesome things that you can do that will completely change your levels of hunger.
We want to know. People want to know.
Yeah, because my first approach is always a last resort to get into looking at portions and calories and stuff like that. We rarely do that. Now we will do it, and some people like to do it, and they've got their apps, and that's fine.
Works for some people.
But really, I just focus on reducing the hunger. So how do I do that? Again, reducing ultra-processed foods, and then looking at, well, what is it that makes you feel more satiated? So the first thing that I would focus on is protein. So protein of all the macronutrients is the most satiating. And these are the type of things that I love, because this is how you lose weight much easier, I would say even effortlessly, but definitely at least easier, and then lead to sustained weight loss. So for instance, in some of these studies, like one of the studies where they told people to increase their protein intake. Now nothing else, they didn't say try to cut back, try to lose weight, nothing like that. They just said increase your protein intake, that's it. So from, I think it was 20 to 30%. Okay, they ate more protein. What happened? They lost 11 pounds in 12 weeks. So they lost a lot of weight.
Just by increasing the protein.
Just by increasing the protein.
Do you know what percentage they increased it by?
I think it was from 20 to 30, from 20% protein maybe they were eating beforehand, and then they were told to increase it to 30%.
Okay.
Now we can put the notes for that
Yeah,
study
we'll
in
add
just
that
to
in
make
for
sure
everybody.
if I don't get the numbers exact, but it's approximately.
But it's not like they're, going from 10 to 90% or something.
Yeah, well,
of their
going for,
calories.
I mean, if it was 20 to 30, that's an extra 50%. So it is a good bit extra protein. But it's not like when you're told, okay, eat more of something,
Yeah.
it doesn't feel like, whoa, that's a terrible thing to do. And there's lots of delicious protein foods, so I don't think it's a problem. But
There
protein
are.
is for sure more satiating per calorie than fat or carbs. So just by doing that, you will feel a lot more satiated, reduces your ground, lots of studies to show this. So as soon as you do that, in that study, they consumed, I think it was exactly 441 less calories. I do remember that one. 441 less calories they were eating per day. So without trying and without effort and without like feeling starving, but forcing themselves to. So that's what I
Right.
love about all the steps that we recommend and we take. It's like that. It's like, oh yeah, you just do this, but you don't have to like use willpower or like try and get yourself to get
Well,
the
let
results.
me ask you this. So say I'm sitting down to dinner, I've got a beautiful, ribeye steak and a baked potato. Would it be smart for me, because protein is more satiating, should I start with the protein first and then whatever room I have left, have the, the potato or something?
Yeah.
Would that help at all?
Absolutely would. Yeah, the order of your food. So interesting, I think this was done in San Diego, great study done where they were looking at it more because they wanted to control blood sugar for diabetes and stuff like that.
Okay.
So they were looking at, well, does it matter? So they had exactly the same food. So they had some kind of protein, some kind of fiber, vegetables, whatever, and some type of carb, which is a normal dinner. So you might have a little bit of salmon, you might have a little bit of, broccoli, vegetables, and then you might have some rice or
Starch.
potatoes or whatever. Yeah. So just a general kind of meal. So one group, they ate the carbs first, and the other group ate the protein and veg first. And the difference was quite remarkable. It's like, I think 50% less of a spike of blood sugar if they ate the protein and fiber before the carbs. And then the other group obviously had more. But what the researchers said was that the people that ate the protein and veg first, they had to eat everything on the plate because it was part of that study. So, but they didn't want to because they felt fuller.
Crazy.
So it absolutely will make you feel more satiated.
Wow.
So we always say, yeah, start with your protein and fiber. And that's the second one. So the first one I said protein, but it leads on to the next one is, so cut out the processed food, eat more protein, but then also eat more fiber. So fiber, I feel like, is one of those things, I always just think it's like a cheat for a gastric bypass. Because like a gastric bypass, basically they staple your stomach so it's smaller. So then when the food goes in, then you'll feel fuller because physically the stomach feels full. And that sends a signal saying, hey, we're full down here, calm down.
Yeah.
So, but fiber does the same thing because when you eat fiber, it expands in your stomach, so it makes you feel fuller and less. Now, fiber as well is one of those things where technically it's calories, but you don't absorb the calories. So it goes to the large intestines, it just feeds bacteria there. So it's not something so you could have 100 grams of fiber, but it won't give you any extra weight. You won't like gain any weight on it, and you won't absorb it as energy.
Wow.
So fiber is like if you do get into calories and stuff like that, you actually, if there's 10 grams of fiber, you have to take that off the calculation, if you like.
It goes in when you hear the terms like net carbs and stuff.
Yeah.
When you start really looking at it,
Yeah, because we obviously get amazing results with people and have over the years, and not just short term, but long term. And that's something that we've always done, because with companies in particular, we used to create all these reports for them to show that the program is working.
Sure.
All across the board, from productivity, energy. But when we kind of average out the results, they're pretty remarkable. When we were getting literally 10x, even 50x in some cases compared to most wellness programs when you take into account the actual amount of people that are doing it.
Wow.
So we're used to working with people in real life and seeing what works rather than theoretically, because you get a lot of people, they just Google a few things.
A lot of armchair experts like me.
Yeah. And when you're actually working with thousands of people over decades, you really see what works in the real world. Because research is great, but it won't actually tell you what to do. It just gives you a little bit of a framework.
That's why I love hearing from you, because it's like you've had so many years of experience with
literally thousands of people, right?
Yeah.
It's so good to talk to someone that's actually seen these things work in real life.
And we've always been by the numbers, so we've database and we look at average results. So it's not just sort of anecdotal here or there, because you can always see an amazing result of anything.
It's always a crazy outlier.
But it could be an outlier. So it's like, I'm always like, well, what are the average results here? So I'm always interested in that, and that's something that we've always kind of focused
I feel
on.
like there's always just some like Greek god genetic freak who's like, guys, you know, this is why you have to do keto. And I'm like, well, it definitely worked for you, and you're also a genetic freak, you know, with amazing, you know, physique already. So it's it's good to see how it works with normal people.
Yeah.
Awesome. Any other little things for satiation before we move on?
Yeah, so the next thing after that then is going back to that understanding. And by the way, I do want to shout out to Stefan Gunne, because he has an amazing book that explains all this called The Hungry Brain. And he explains all this about the ghrelin,
We can probably
leptin,
put a
the
link to that,
hypothalamus.
right?
Absolutely,
Awesome.
yeah. I'm going to definitely add it to our bookshelf there. So I have all audio books, so I got to get the ones. So
I know, we got to
people
fill
what
this thing up.
Yeah, for sure. So, but that's a brilliant book where he explains all this and goes through the research. So going back to that idea where a particular flavor or taste is going to make you feel satiated, and it's only when you start mixing them that then that resets the hunger. So I would say when you're eating, try to stick to a certain kind of group of foods that, again, you're not mixing like savory and sweet, because then that's going to keep causing you to eat more. So more protein, more fiber, and then try to stick to one particular flavor, and then you'll feel more satiated with less calories.
Awesome.
So that's
good to know.
That's another big one.
Write that down, people. Okay, so we can't talk about weight loss without talking about the metabolism. So can you give everybody a little, just brief rundown? What is the metabolism?
Okay.
And how does it work?
Yeah. So metabolism is the energy system inside the cells. That's largely the amount of mitochondria that you have in your cells. So that takes food and fat and converts it into energy. So kind of your engine, if you think of it like that, and very important for all around health. So even forgetting about weight loss, weight gain, your metabolism is so important, like every cell in the body. How you can convert all that into energy is so vital. And it's obviously major component to not only just losing weight, but then maintaining your weight loss. Because the problem is with a lot of people when they lose weight, again, they just oversimplify. I'm going to cut back on my food intake and maybe try and burn extra calories by doing exercise. That's the general kind of senses of because it seems sort of logical, but in a weird way, if you do that without understanding these other components, that's it's pretty much proven not to work.
Yeah.
So there's a great study back in 2007, UCLA, and they studied all the most popular diets and weight loss diets, and they found that always long term, once they go 1 to 4 years, everyone ends up regaining the weight. Sometimes in a lot of cases, they'll end up worse than when they started. And that's definitely largely due with the fact that their metabolisms are not as good as they used to. Because if you just reduce your calories, well, then you're probably reducing your protein. You're reducing your nutrients.
Yeah.
And all these things are so important. So, you know, you need like magnesium, you need all these nutrients for your metabolism to work very effectively. So you're kind of already we're malnourished. We'll do a whole other podcast on that because that's huge.
Oh, yeah.
So now we're going to be even more malnourished, less protein, all of these things. And a lot of times when people lose weight, a lot of their weight loss is actually muscle. And that's a big problem. A lot of methods out there, up to 50%, even more in some cases of the weight loss is muscle. Now muscle is what burns fat. So when I talk about, okay, fat burns a tiny amount, I think it's like 2 calories per pound of fat, but it's pretty much, it's mainly in the muscle cells and how much mitochondria and the quality of muscle, not just the quantity. I see all sorts of people getting all that wrong as well online. I don't know why, but they don't realize that while maybe each pound of muscle only burns whatever 6 calories per pound or whatever, but if you are doing resistance training and you've gained 3 pounds of muscle, you've probably activated so many other pounds of muscle in the body, and that's become way better and more efficient and will burn a lot more calories. Because you will see studies, for instance, and I know of a study, for instance, that a person gains 3 pounds of muscle, but the amount of calories they burn is an extra 150 a day. So it's not just the amount of muscle, it's the quality of muscle. So that's really where the metabolism comes from. And again, just to illustrate it, and it is an extreme example, but it really does illustrate the point beautifully, was an amazing study done by the NIH, National Institute of Health. And they looked at the Biggest Loser. So if anyone's seen the Biggest Loser show, they take this to the extreme because they're like trying to lose a colossal amount of weight in a short amount of time. And they're exercising an amazing amount of hours every day, like 6 to 8 hours a day of exercise. So they're burning loads of calories. They're on a starvation diet. In some shape or form, they've reduced their calories dramatically. And of course, they lose lots of weight. But what they did in this study was they did a follow-up 5 years later, I don't know, 5 or 6 years later, and they went around to all the contestants. I know Danny Cowell was the one that won that first one, and they tested their metabolisms. And their metabolism was way, way lower than they should have been. So taking someone equal, height, age, weight, sex, or whatever, their metabolisms were way lower. And they were finding it impossible to maintain that weight loss because most of them had regained the weight. Again, some of them even more. And it was just crazy because if they did anything, the weight would just come back on because they literally damaged their metabolisms possibly.
Is it because they just focused on weight loss and not muscle retention?
Yeah.
And so once you burn off all your muscle, there goes your metabolism.
Yeah, and that's what most people are doing. And that's why in all these studies, and that's why we've got these huge rates, because if it was that easy, oh yeah, I'll just eat less and exercise more, well then everyone would be doing it, everyone would be in great shape, and we wouldn't have the rates of obesity and amount of people that are overweight. It just wouldn't be happening because it was all that easy and it worked.
Yeah.
So it's not that. It's not that. Again, those are the components, but metabolism is vital, and that's why we actually test people's metabolisms here all the time. So we've got this, it's actually a machine down here, yeah. So you just breathe in and out, and it records your resting metabolic rate. That's the only thing. How many calories you burn exercise, again, maybe we'll do another thing on this, is irrelevant.
We'll get there, yeah.
Yeah, it's actually what your resting metabolic rate is what you want to look at. So that's literally how much fat you're burning while you sleep.
Just by existing.
While you're watching TV. So it's nice to get that number up.
Yeah.
That's the best way. So you absolutely have to, at the very least, not let your metabolism go down too much while you lose weight.
Let me pause you right there because you touched on it a little bit like twice now because we have a viewer question. This is from Carrie in Illinois. And her question is, does restricting calories slow down your metabolism? So can we go into that just a little bit more? Which I think you kind of have already, so.
Yeah. Well, does restricting calories reduce your metabolism? So,
and when is it actually an issue?
Yeah.
Because I think people are like, well, this article online told me never to go on a different diet because I'm just going to gain all the weight back and I'm gonna destroy my metabolism.
Yeah. Now, I hate keeps answering, but I always answer this one as like nearly any questions. It depends, because when you're working with people, you'll realize, okay, you can have all these studies, everything is averaged out, but nobody's average. So when you're actually working with people in real life, it's very different because for one person, something could work and another thing may not. So it really gets down to the individual. So like with that question, so if you reduce your calories, for instance, 2 calories a day, is that going to reduce your metabolism? Well, not necessarily. And it depends what else you're doing. So if you didn't, again, for the average person, and all they did was reduce their calories, still the same unhealthy diet, and now they're just eating less of it, and they're not doing anything to preserve muscle tissue. And especially if you reduce calories dramatically and you don't know what you're doing, that's where you can absolutely run into trouble, where your metabolism will slow down.
So it's not just I feel like what people think is it's like a magic switch of like, oh my gosh, I accidentally turned off my metabolism and it's never coming back.
Yeah.
What we're doing is because we're not eating the right foods and exercising properly and we're in a calorie deficit, we are losing our muscle and we are nutrient deficient. Yeah. And that is what's really impacting the metabolism negatively.
Yeah. So again, I mean, if you did nothing else and you, for instance, you're going to reduce just calories overall, and again, you're taking in less protein, less micronutrients, well, then obviously your metabolism will drop. And of course, the more you do it, the worse it'll be. So that's the thing that we, again, always do. We do the test your metabolism and keep an eye on that. And we're also looking at body composition so that when a person does lose the weight, that at the very least is the majority is fat. And in some cases, people can gain muscle and lose fat at the same time, which is even better. So the big things, the big things you want to do to offset that then is, of course, you want to preserve or gain muscle tissue while you lose the weight. And that's a surefire way for success,
That's
that
great.
you're not going to upset your metabolism too much.
Awesome. Okay, you just touched on it, so I think it's the perfect segue. Let's talk about calories.
Okay.
And calories, this whole, a lot of, I feel like the internet is ruthless, and it's like more contentious than the right versus left in politics, more contentious than religion. People get so ruthless on it. Some people are like, it's only calories, that's all that matters. Calories in, calories out.
Yeah.
Let's talk about it.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think a lot of it is just because people are not defining what they're saying or what they mean. Because you do see the extremes where, the only thing that matters is calories in, calories out. Now, but there's a big difference between cause and effect. So in other words, it's like the horse and the cart, like which goes first. So when I think of it, like, now there's a message that's out there. And I would say, well, I know that definitely companies push it because they don't want their products to be demonized. So there was an ad that went out. I'm not going to mention the company. We don't have a good legal team yet set up yet for any of these things, but no, but
we don't have one at all.
But I'm sure it's just a fact. But they were big into promoting the idea that a calorie is a calorie and it doesn't matter and blah blah blah, just so that then their ultra processed sugary products can be part of a
Healthy diet.
Yeah. So there is that kind of underlying push. So you got to be wary of that. So again, this idea that the only thing that matters is calories. On the effect side that comes out, and then there's the other group that almost overly go the opposite side, that calories don't count at all.
Eat 5,000 a day, doesn't matter.
And it doesn't matter, yeah. Like there's no question, if you consume 10,000 calories a day, even if it's so-called a healthy, in a healthy way, you're still going to gain weight. Like there's no question. But there's so much complexity in the middle of all that, because a calorie is not a calorie to start with. So for instance, if you consume 100 calories in the form of protein, well, 25% of those calories you actually need to use as energy just to break down that protein and absorb it properly. So then you're only going to get 75% of those calories. And we talked about it before. Fiber, for instance, those calories don't get used up as energy at all. So you disregard those. So calorie is not a calorie. So it depends on the food and how it's broken down, etc. So even to do the math is very difficult when you really get down to it if you want it to be accurate.
Yeah.
And all these kind of studies say, well, we thought this was going to happen because we restricted the calories here, we did this, but the end result was not what we thought. And again, they're not taking metabolism into account. So again, if your metabolism is shrinking and you're just looking at calories in, calories out, and ignoring the engine in the middle of it, well, then you're going to get everything wrong as well. So that's a huge component. So that's why so again, to kind of get specific about this, because I do want to try to clear this up as best I can. So if the message is the only thing that you should focus on when you're trying to lose weight is calories in, calories out, and ignore everything else, if that's what you're saying, then I wholeheartedly disagree.
Because that's the bro science narrative. The Rip Dude on YouTube, it's, guys, my resting metabolic rate is 2,500 calories a day. So if I drop down to 200 calories a day, I'm going to get shredded. And that's all that matters.
Yeah.
And they'll be like, I'm going to have a Rice Krispie treat because I have 100 calories left or whatever it is. That's kind of the running narrative.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, for a young, healthy person who's doing exercise, weight training, they're consuming a lot of protein, and they're doing all of those things, and then they're just tweaking this little bit to kind of gain. then that'll probably work out pretty well for them. But that's not the average person. And again, we're already taking a whole bunch of other components that they're already doing and prioritizing, maybe not consciously or whatever. So yeah, when you got everything else dialed in, I mean, definitely if you're into like a boxer and you got to be at a certain weight, or you're a bodybuilder and you're trying to cut or whatever, they get very specific about their calories, and that really helps to fine tune that end point. But that's a very different compared to the average person that goes, oh, put on weight during the pandemic or whatever, and they're trying to lose 15, 20 pounds. And then the first thing they do is just cut their calories and not change the type of food, or try to improve the health of the food or the fiber, the protein, or any of those things, or do some resistance training to preserve the muscle and take care of your metabolism. That's going to be a disaster for that person. So again, you have to be very specific. Who are we talking about? Are they just saying that it does, like, does protein not matter? Okay, try going on a zero protein diet for
good luck.
and see how long you
not fun.
last. So so that's the thing. And again, ignore your hunger at the same time as well, and all those things. So if you don't take into account those things, that's the last thing we look at on the priority list. Now, for some people, they like to do that and they can fine tune. And if you do that in conjunction with looking at the quality of the food and all these other things, like the going back to the brain and the hunger and your metabolism, then it can be absolutely great to do that in conjunction with everything else. But again, getting the horse before the cart, I'm always going to say, number one, you got to look at that satiation aspect and what makes you hungry, what makes you feel full. That's the overriding. And then I think with that, or very close, is going to be the insulin, blood sugar. And that's going to be a huge component. I was just about to say, yeah,
it's like...
And then your metabolism. So if you look at that almost as those three components, they are way, way higher up than just, like, again, just... Now, again, you could do those three and still consume 10,000 calories and gain weight, right?
Yeah.
So within the extremes. But it's very hard to, because if you feel very satiated, it's going to be incredibly hard to try and force yourself to overeat.
Yeah.
So that's why I love getting the right things in place, because then, like, honestly, if you talk to most people that are with the weight, a few people, like I said, like to count calories, and that's fine. But most people that we work with that get amazing results, that are losing 50, 60, 70 pounds a year, we've even had people lose 100 pounds a year, and they do it without counting calories, without starving themselves, feeling great, without sacrificing their metabolisms. They still have great energy as well. And I think that's what people are looking for. If you can have great energy, you feel good, you don't feel like you're depriving yourself, you feel satiated, and you're healthy, and then almost like as a side effect, oh yeah, the weight's falling off, and it's not even an effort. Like in those studies, you increase your fiber, you increase your protein. These are people that are losing weight without trying, without consciously feeling like this is a struggle. That's awesome. And that is the answer. And that's the only way it's going to work for people and going to maintain the results long term.
That's amazing. I think one of the biggest other component we haven't talked about is exercise. Yeah. And we have a question from Aaron in Dayton, Ohio. Shout out, Ohio. But the question is, which is better for weight loss, anaerobic or aerobics? And we would break that down probably into cardio versus resistance and strength training.
Yeah. Okay, so anaerobic and aerobic, that's...
it's actually more complicated than people want it to be.
Yeah,
it's
we're going to get into all the
not one or the other.
And the heart rate and stuff, because that... I definitely want to cover that in more detail and know all about that, because that's aerobic. Anaerobic is a fascinating, and we have, again, in our masterclass, we have this talk about these two energy systems.
Yes.
Because we do have these two very distinct energy systems.
Both usually working together.
Yeah.
So maybe for our purposes, let's break it down between resistance training and cardio.
Yeah.
And I think most people will understand that. It's a
yeah,
little bit
although
easier to
most
get into.
people do cardio not in the aerobic zone, so they get that wrong.
Next podcast,
so
folks.
That's the problem. So, okay, well,
where do you start?
I want to really, I want to hopefully answer the question so that they are satisfied with it. But okay, let me put it this way. If I had to pick the most important aspect, again, and particularly with weight loss, it's going to come down to the muscle Again, we
Yes.
talked about that. Muscle is what burns fat, and we want to maintain our metabolism or even boost your metabolism while you burn the fat even better. So for sure, resistance training is going to be number one. Because that's a little bit different, like I said, between aerobic and anaerobic. Now, generally, resistance training is anaerobic.
Yes.
Glycogen in the muscle and stuff like that. So that's always going to be number one. So if you ask me what's better, strength training or cardio, then I'm going to say strength training. Now, obviously, cardio can burn fat. I would say a lot of people are doing it wrong, because another huge component when it comes to exercise is we're going back to that thing about the hunger.
Yeah.
Because when you do this sort of no man's land, I call it, with the training, so you can either train aerobically, which is a much lower heart rate than most people do when they're doing cardio. But if you do that, it's before the stress threshold. So you're not going into glycogen stores and you're not creating a lot of stress in the body. And that way you can kind of effortlessly burn extra fat, because it's actually, so aerobic means with oxygen. And that is purely burning fat as energy.
Yes.
So fat breaks down into fatty acids and then you use that. But that's called, like, well, some people call it the Maffetone method. He was one of the very first amazing pioneers to discover that. And then also zone 2. Peter Attia talks a lot about the
Yes, he
zone
does.
2, and he goes in depth, and it's similar. And there's, like I said, we'll do a whole thing on that. So if you're genuinely doing that, just burning fat as energy, it doesn't matter if you do 2 hours, 4 hours, 30 minutes. That's going to help. But like I said, strength training number one, resistance training, then that, and then what you want to avoid is a sort of in between, where you're doing a higher intensity cardio for too long of a period of time, because that will deplete your system of glycogen. So if you do 1 or 2 hours of, this sort of kind of spinning type stuff or whatever, people come out of those type of circuit things or whatever, and they are starving. And your body is looking for the glycogen. So they're not starving for salads or even protein. They're starving for carbs.
Never heard someone say I'm starving for a
I
salad.
know, I could murder a piece of lettuce. So what they're going to reach for is
I thought I'd
definitely
never hear you say
something
that.
sweet or starchy or whatever to kind of, so that's the biggest, and again, comes up in the research. So the problem is you do that type of exercise and then the body then responds by going, whoa, we're depleted here, quickly get the calories back in. And when you work out the calories that you burn while you exercise, I mean, a few bites of something, that's gone.
Yeah.
So that's where that whole kind of thing where they're looking at that, I mean, it's just, it just doesn't work.
And
Again,
so a
for
lot
the
of it
average
comes down
person.
to, let's put on more lean muscle mass so that all of our lives we are just burning more calories. Our resting metabolic rate is higher, instead of just burning an extra 200 calories that we're going to go eat for breakfast.
Yeah, for sure. So muscle tissue, resistance training in particular when you're trying to lose weight, it becomes even more important, because again, normally people are just reducing their calories. They're probably increasing exercise, but not the type that's going to gain much muscle. So they're not necessarily doing strength training because they're just looking at how many calories am I burning. So they're pounding the treadmill, bikes, that type of stuff.
And they just leave hungrier.
Yeah, but if you do like heavier types of exercise, that's going to really stimulate the mitochondria, biogenesis, all that kind of stuff. So you get way better metabolism from resistance training.
Awesome. So I want to make sure that we can give people some actionable steps when it comes to exercise for weight loss. And obviously here at Resistance, we've always focused on high intensity, shorter duration resistance training sessions.
Yep.
Can you talk about why we do that versus, an hour and a half long workout like a lot of people do in the gym? Does that have an effect on the hormones, and does that affect weight loss? In short, I know it could be a whole big topic.
Yeah, I mean, I can go into major detail, but just on a simple level, I mean, intensity is the key, because intensity, there's this thing called hormesis. So a lot of things work positively in the body because there's a little bit of stress that creates a positive response. So even if you take like turmeric, for instance, it's actually, a lot of these spices and things work because they're slightly toxic to the body, and then the body responds to that by producing positive hormones, etc. So
good. I had Thai last night.
So high intensity training, I always prefer many levels. Number one, it's a lot less time. Most people are very busy, so they don't have hours and hours every day to do this. But I also find it's way more effective because if you really focus on the intensity of the workout and really get through the workout faster, that does produce more of this hormesis and positive hormonal effects. So again, when you look at that, and we have this in the masterclass, and you can kind of see the hormesis effect. So shorter, higher intensity won't deplete your system of the glycogen, so the hunger factor is not a big deal, and you get all the positives without the downsides. So that's a big thing why we do that. And even in the studies, it shows it's way more effective. Like ACE, they did a great research, I think it was in 2018, comparing 20-minute high intensity resistance training, HIRT, compared to the traditional 45 minutes to an hour of the traditional type of strength training. And they found that all across the board, the results were as good as or better with the 20-minute workout.
Wow.
But not only that, the results happened much faster. So they hit the results in 3 weeks, whereas in the other group, it took them 6 weeks to get equal results. Now, there's, again, another time, but there's always this debate between volume and intensity. And we can go through that another time. But generally, that's a few of the main reasons we do high intensity.
Yeah, and later on, everybody that's listening, we're going to get into some actionable protocols, and how often should you be putting high intensity workouts into your routine, all that kind of stuff. So hang tight, we'll get to that at the end. But before we move on from this topic, is there anything else you want to cover?
Well, just overall, I just want to really kind of, again, because it can seem all very complicated, but in a simple way, again, you go back to eating what we did a few hundred years ago, that's a great start. And then just understanding those few components, like, again, just eating more protein, fiber, the order that you eat your food, those few steps that we talked about. And you combine that with resistance training. It doesn't have to be a lot. Again, just 10, 20 minutes a few times a week. And then if you wanted to throw in something extra, because again, going back to that question, I do think that, Maffetone Zone 2, that true aerobic training as an addition can be, it is brilliant for health in other ways, and it is something that I recommend, but that's another
Give us just a short little version of what does the Maffetone method look like?
Okay.
What would you do every day?
Yeah, so the way I would do the Maffetone, my favorite way is I just go for a walk or a hike. Okay. And then I check my heart rate. Very simple formula, 180 minus your age, and you keep it below that. So in my case, I'm almost 50, so 180 minus my age is 130. So I'm aiming between 120 to 130 in the heart rate.
Just staying right in that zone while you're walking.
Yeah. Now, there's other components, and I advise people to go to the Maffetone method and look it up. Peter Tia goes into it in more detail. He even has a device, and he kind of approaches it slightly differently, but similar kind of effects. So that's where, so you just go for a nice hike. So if you're going uphill, it's probably fine walking. If you're going downhill, you might need to break into a little jog. Depends on your level of fitness. And you do that ideally 30, 40 minutes a few times a week. You can do a elliptical machine, treadmill, bike, or whatever, and again, do that. You could be, and it's at the level that you don't feel too stressed. So you could talk to somebody, etc., while you're doing that. So that's definitely a good way to do it.
And the people that listen to episode number 1, maybe you could put on your heart rate monitor, start walking down the stairs too.
Yeah, going down the stairs for the eccentric. Well, that's a little different thing, but yeah, for sure.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. We're going to get into some rapid fires. So you're going to have about 30 seconds to a minute to answer those. So we're going to hit some hot topics. And guys, stick around towards the end because we are going to get in some actionable protocols. So, what does weight loss look like in your life? How do we schedule our workouts? How do we do that? What do we eat? So let's get into it right now. Okay. Thurston, you're in the hot seat. You ready?
Yep.
Are abs made in the kitchen?
Very good. I would 100% say abs are made in the kitchen. So all this stuff, like the funny thing is I never train my abs. And everyone's on the core, you got to train your abs and whatever.
We might put it up on the screen. He's got abs.
I do have abs. Everyone has abs. They're just hiding, right?
Yeah.
So it's not like you got to create abs where you didn't have them. Everyone's got them. They just need to be able to show them there's something in the way. So this idea that you're going to train your abs and miraculously all the fat around there is going to disappear is a complete myth.
Okay.
It doesn't happen. Doesn't work that way.
All right. Well, that leads us right into our next one. Does spot reduction work? Can you work a specific thing to lose to lose fat there?
No. Again, I always give the analogy, it's like a bath of water, and you get your little scoop of like a little bucket or something, and you scoop some water out. You're not left with a hole where the bucket was take the water out, right?
Yep.
So it's a little bit like that with the body. So you just need to overall reduce your body fat percentage, and wherever you're holding the most amount of fat, that's where it's going to burn off. There's a little bit between the different types of fat, omega-3, omega-6, but not going to go too far into that. So in other words, if you do it in a healthier way, it does tend to target the midsection a little bit more, but that's just overall with health and nutrition and even the type of fats that you eat. So spot reduction, I would say no.
Okay. Intermittent fasting with larger, less frequent meals will slow down your metabolism and make you fat.
Every second study seems to say the opposite. It's kind of funny. I've been watching this. But again, in real life, working with people, for most people, I find intermittent fasting works very well. Again, it's just one tool in the toolbox. If you don't feel good, you don't have to do it. But for some people, it works spectacularly well and they love it. And sometimes it's just the fact that because they're keeping their eating windows smaller, it's easy for them to stick to that. But there is, going back to the ghrelin thing, so I will say something about that. Like say, for instance, you decide to skip breakfast and you're just going to eat lunch and dinner and you're going to reduce your eating window. A couple of things happen. First of all, you're longer periods of time without taking in food. That can be advantageous from a blood sugar perspective. Because if you're a longer period of time without taking in any extra sugar or glycogen or whatever through your food, that can be very good even for blood sugar management. But the other thing is, like say you skip your breakfast. On day one, you'll still feel hungry because your body's used to eating food at a particular time, so your ghrelin will be quite high. But day two, it'll be a bit less, day three, and by day four, it's almost gone. So it is something, if somebody is going to try it and they only try it for 1 or 2 days, go, oh my God, no, I can't live without breakfast. You stick with it for a few more days, the ghrelin drops, and that's, again, the hunger hormone. So that's one of the reasons why I think it can work quite well. So once your body goes, oh, I'm going to give up telling him to eat because he's not eating now, so I'll just go sleep. And then the ghrelin goes asleep, and then you'll be less hungry, and then you'll find it easier. So just to bear that in mind. So I think there's a few components to it. So again, without getting crazy into it, try it. If it works well and you feel good, you look good, your metabolism is good, well then it works, right? And then
awesome. And that was just under 30 seconds, so I nailed that one.
well, I've only got 30 seconds. Okay, I didn't know.
No, last one.
Okay.
Drinking a gallon of cold water a day will make me lose weight.
I mean, it could. I'm really not into all that kind of thing. So there is a thermogenic thing, especially the colder the water, the more you're going to burn a tiny amount of calories. And if you drink water, your stomach will feel a little bit fuller. I'm just not crazy about that because, well, first of all, you got to watch your electrolytes because if you drink loads of water, you dilute everything. There could be a problem there. You got to keep that balance going. So I've always just been of the mindset, if you're thirsty, drink a glass of water and go by your thirst. There's all sorts of research, but this idea that we need to be drinking a colossal amount of water doesn't really hold water. Oh, it's a terrible pun, but there you go.
God, turn the camera off. Turn it off. No, I'm just kidding.
Okay.
All right, we promised the people some actionable steps or protocols for weight loss. So let's get started with nutrition. What is some final wisdom you want to bestow on our lovely audience?
Yep. So with nutrition, step number one, reduce the amount of ultra-processed foods in the diet. That's making you hungry, it's making you overeat, super bad for your health.
Okay.
Then number two, you want to increase your protein intake.
Okay.
Makes you feel way more satiated and will help go against the loss of muscle tissue and maintain your metabolism higher.
Okay.
Number three, increasing your fiber intake. For weight loss in particular, that can be a useful tool.
Any specific fiber you recommend? I know you take psyllium husk a lot.
Yeah, it's whatever works for you. So
Okay.
again, in the research, they show that psyllium husk fiber makes you feel as satiated as eating a meal,
Wow.
which is pretty cool. So again, in the research, if you increase or take fiber before each meal, and you could just take like one of these fibers that you just buy and take it, you will just feel more satiated and end up consuming a lot less
And then also just increasing the fiber in your actual
actual
food.
food. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
awesome.
for sure. So that's the fiber. Again, watching the different flavors of the foods in each meal, and then the order of foods as well. So there's kind of a number of steps that I think will make a big difference. And then the last one, which again we'll cover in more detail because there's so many aspects to it, but just micronutrient levels, making sure that you increase those. Because as you decrease your calories, most people are already malnourished. We don't want the malnourished to go even further. So we want to increase, as we decrease the calories, increase the micronutrients and your protein at the same time.
Okay, amazing. Anything else there?
Yeah, well, again, you could try the intermittent fasting, see if it works for you. That's a good thing to throw in there. And yeah, we have a few other things in the masterclass, but I think overall that's plenty to start with.
Awesome. Let's jump into exercise. For the average person looking to trim down, lose some body fat, what would you advise them to do on a daily or weekly basis?
Okay, well, absolutely number one, resistance training for
Okay.
sure. Because again, that's going to have the biggest impact on preserving the muscle tissue and your metabolism as you lose the weight, and can even boost your metabolism. So that for sure. And again, it just depends. So for, even if you did one 30-minute bout of eccentric training, as we covered in the first podcast, that can be very, very effective for your metabolism. But if you can, ideally, I would recommend doing about 20 minutes higher intensity resistance training at least 3 times a week.
Okay, 3 times a week.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this. Because the legs have the largest amount of muscle, is it more advantageous to really train your legs more if you're wanting to lose weight? Would that have a bigger overall effect on your metabolism?
Yeah, we always say if you could only ever do one exercise, it would be the squat.
Got it.
Because you're going to get the compression on the whole body. Because even when you do squats, you feel it even in your chest, back, everything.
It's great for our bones too.
Oh yeah, for bone density
Yeah.
for sure. So yeah, but the squats are absolutely, like, for metabolism perspective, for weight loss, is going to be the number one. I always say, like, oh, you want really good abs, then do squats.
Yeah.
So, because overall your metabolism is going to be greater. Again,
burn that whole fat.
we covered that. Yeah, it's going to burn way more fat. So yeah, but you want to hit all the major muscle groups. So for women in particular, they have a lot more muscle mass in the lower body. So they're just going to see better effects from doing, obviously the quads, the hamstrings, the glutes. Those are the biggest muscle groups that you want to hit. But again, ideally try to hit all the muscles in the body.
Yeah.
Chest, back, shoulders, arms, legs, calves, everything. Because again, just think about all those cells. You're going to get them like red hot on fire. You're going to really improve that, and that's just going to melt the fat away.
Pretend I'm a middle-aged woman, which, whatever. I want to lose some. We got Ben back there. I don't know what's going on. We're just going to keep talking, whatever. Like I said, pretend I'm a middle-aged woman.
Okay.
I want to lose weight. Should I spend my time in Pilates or leg pressing my face off?
Well, I'm not sure about your face off, but leg pressing for sure. Yeah.
Cool.
Again, higher resistance training. I mean, Pilates, I think, is great for posture, all those things. But purely, again, going back to metabolism, you do kind of heavier types of exercise, get deeper. Ideally, eccentric training, even better. Again, you're going to stimulate the metabolism way more effective. Again, just think about it. You want to get deeper inside all those muscle fibers. If you do light weights, it only gets the surface layer. No matter how many hours you do,
2x
you want to
muscle
get
fiber.
right down deeper. Yeah, not just surface, not just slow twitch. You want to get the fast twitch and the 2x, and that's going to boost your metabolism way more effectively.
Awesome. Awesome. Let's talk really quick. Last thing, other lifestyle factors. What do you have for us? What should we cut out? What should we add? What does a healthy lifestyle look like for weight loss?
Okay, so your circadian rhythm is going to be important, sleep and stress. So all these things, I kind of group them together. But for instance, if you only sleep like 4 hours compared to 8 hours, the next day you're going to consume an extra couple of hundred calories because you're going to be, the body's going to be hungrier. Also, your blood sugar response is going to be much worse. Like if your normal blood sugar response is like that of a pre-diabetic, if you only get 4 hours sleep. So really good quality sleep.
Plus, we're also rebuilding our damaged muscle while we sleep as well for recovery. Yeah.
So sleep, it does, I mean, is, you know, again, we could do a whole thing on this. There's a great book, Why We Sleep. But very, very important. Yeah. So sleep and stress as well, because it's going to produce cortisol. Excess cortisol is going to reduce the amount of muscle that you have. It's going to wear down your muscle and then consequently lower your metabolism. Yeah. So, I mean, life is life and we're going to be hit with challenges. Yeah. But learning genuinely good techniques to deal with stress. I mean, stress is going to happen in varying degrees to us. But how we handle it is going to be try to gain as much control as you can of that as possible. Yeah.
I know you've listened to him a good amount. I think maybe I have more, but just for the people, I think Andrew Huberman is a pretty good resource, his podcast for stress management and sleep especially.
Yeah. A lot of people will talk about the sleep in particular, but so those are our lifestyle components that are going to be very important. And everything from getting outside, the light, circadian rhythm. Again, we'll go into this in other podcasts, but all for all-around health, etc., is going to be important. So,
awesome. All right.
Yep.
That's it for us? Is it that simple, Thurston?
I don't know how people will think it's simple or complicated after this, but yeah, I mean, I really do think that if you can start to understand these concepts, you can absolutely lose weight. You can do it a lot more effortlessly. You will lose more weight and you will keep it off long term. It is absolutely possible for the vast majority of people to do that. Everyone's different. They're going to have different challenges from emotional eating, etc. So some people will have to focus on things that we didn't cover here. So that's important too, to kind of acknowledge that. But I do think for the vast majority of people, they get those components and they understand even just that little bit because, okay, it's whatever, an hour long. But if you're serious about this long term, you can just keep re-listening and understand those components and even go to other resources if you want to understand it even deeper. But you can do it, and it doesn't have to be this horrible struggle where anytime you do it, you're starving and you feel terrible. You should feel good, satiated, and lose the weight and be able to maintain it long term.
Well, thank you for giving us all that information, for sitting down once again. Everybody at home watching or listening, thanks for tuning in. If you like what you're hearing, please like and subscribe and get rowdy in the comments if you want. We'd love to engage with you guys there. And until next time, that's Thurston and Connor out on the Resistance Podcast.
Thank you.